Without hesitation, Gu Lufeng took the lead and slowly walked into the passageway. Hushi quietly walked behind him, studying the passageway as she walked along. She truly didn't expect there to be such a passageway in Shengda Hall's rear courtyard. Along the way, the passageway was deadly silent. All that could be heard was their quiet footsteps echoing in the passageway as they walked. But suddenly Hushi heard Gu Lufeng's soft and low voice sound out. After that day, I looked into the name Nalan Hushi. Then, I came to understand that Nalan Hushi was Nalan Zhengzi's concubine-born daughter, who had always been abandoned to their courtyard located at the foot of Tsang Mountain. Furthermore, the rumors said that Nalan Hushi was weak, ugly, and suffered humiliation and bullying in courtyard but was unable to rebel against it. Hushi's footsteps faintly paused at his words, and she raised her eyebrows. Afterwards, Gu Lufeng turned his head around. In the dim passageway his appearance was fuzzy, but his eyes were brightly lit up. But the type of person Nalan Hushi is and how she lived her life doesn't concern me. This is because the person I've come to know is genius Dr. Shiyu. The person I've sworn loyalty to is Shiyu. Hushi's mouth lifted into a shallow smile, but she didn't respond. And Gu Lufeng no longer spoke either. He merely turned around and proceeded to walk further inside the secret passageway. After walking for about 7 or 8 more minutes, a small transmission array could be seen at the end of the passageway. At the sight of the transmission array, Hushi was filled with amazement. One had to understand that transmission arrays weren't at all common in Miluo continent. This was due to the fact that transmission arrays needed array masters at great scholar level to be created, and after their creation, they needed a large amount of crystal stones every day to stay open. Up until this point, Hushi had always thought that Gu Lufeng only had one medicinal hall under his name. But she understood, if he only had a single medicinal hall, it would be impossible for him to keep this transmission array open. As they neared the transmission array, the light from the array turned brighter and brighter, and in the blink of an eye, the pair appeared in the middle of a remote jungle. This is Yinjing City's northern outskirts. Because its spiritual qi is weak, just like the spiritual qi at the foot of Tsang Mountain, few people reside or visit here. Gu Lufeng kept leading Hushi forward, and after a bit, they finally arrived in front of a courtyard. The northern outskirts were already uninhabited, and the courtyard was hidden amongst the trees. So, if somebody wasn't intentionally trying to find the courtyard, they would truly pass by it without a second thought. They slowly walked until they reached the middle of the courtyard. Gu Lufeng didn't say anything. Instead, he clapped his hand in the middle of the air. Soon, 5 silhouettes could be seen descending from the sky. Their extensive training was evident as they lined up in a line and bowed toward Gu Lufeng. Greetings to young master. But there wasn't a hint of surprise on Hushi's face when she saw this scene. From the moment she entered this second courtyard, she already felt the presence of 5 powerful and steady breaths hidden all around the courtyard. It seemed as if those 5 breaths belonged to these 5 people. Gu Lufeng looked at Hushi and faintly smiled. Shiyu, over these past years, I've been secretly cultivating various powers in order to contend against Murong family, in the hopes that I'll one day be able to bring my mother back from Murong family. These powers are in various aspects, but it wouldn't be good for me to show my own face, so I trained these 5 people who would deal with each individual power. These 5 people have been by my side for the last 10 years, and their reliability is unquestionable. Shiyu, you have my full permission to send them on any errands you need them to go on. Hushi swept a glance at the 5 persons and discovered that each of them were at Meridian's stage. The one who seemed to be leading the group looked to be a male around 30 years old. He was tall, and his whole body had rugged-looking flesh. His eyes were tiger-like, and his whole body radiated coldness, and even carried a small trace the smell of blood. His cultivation seemed to have already arrived at the summit of Meridian stage and was nearing Gold Core stage. 3/3 bonus chapter sponsored by Alexa Redheart. Regular updates will resume after June 26. The person to the left of him was a beautiful woman who wore colorful makeup and beautiful clothing, which didn't fully disguise her plump curves. If one were to look at her from the outside, they would assume that she was a female brothel keeper. But even though she looked to be a romantic woman on the outside, She actually had a high-level meridian stage cultivation level. The second male appeared to be about 40 years old. His figure was short and plump, and the smile that rested on his face resembled that of Maitreya I. But the spiritual power fluctuations on his body were practically non-existent. If it weren't for the fact that Hushi's senses were keener than most, she would practically be unable to sense the fluctuations at all. The clothes of the other two people resembled those of imperial bodyguards, and the final person's clothes resembled that of a medicinal hall's shopkeeper. All three of them were at the middle of meridian stage. Gu Lufeng pointed at the first male and introduced him. This is Qian Bai. He has been by my side the longest, and is also the brother who I pass life with. Under him, he has established an army of hired soldiers. Although all of these soldiers are only at foundation establishment stage, each of them has strengths that far surpass any other martial artist at the same stage. It could be said that this army of troops was the one I spent the most thought on to create. Chunbai bowed in response to Gu Liufeng's words. This subordinate's life was saved by young master. It is this subordinate's willingness to be by young master's side. This subordinate doesn't dare to be called brother by young master. His words were full of respect, but he held a suspicious expression as he closely examined Hushi. This youngster was at nothing more than foundation establishment stage and didn't seem to possess any special qualities. Yet, young master was personally introducing them, the 5 guards, to him? What for? Hushi nodded her head but didn't say anything. Gu Lufeng moved on and pointed at the soul woman. Mei Ru Yin is the boss at Ru Yifeng. She is mainly in charge of gathering information. Ru Yifeng? Wasn't that the famous place for singing and dancing? It was similar to a brothel, but considered to be a higher grade than a brothel. The women inside were all multi-talented. They didn't sell their bodies. Instead, they sold their skills. Some of the women even had a low level of cultivation, causing their dances to appear immortal-like. In turn, this earned the love of the martial artists in Yinjing City. She didn't expect that Ru Yifeng was also one of the powers under Gu Liufeng's hands. When Mei Ru Yin heard Gu Liufeng's words, she turned to bewitchingly smile at Hushi. Her flirtatious eyes wandered over Hushi's body and she said, "Young brother, do you wish to go to New Jia's to Ru Yifeng to take a stroll? Since you're such a handsome brother, Ru Yin will allow the sisters inside Ru Yifeng to entertain you for free." In this moment, Hushi didn't know whether she should laugh or cry. She was a woman, yet this female brothel boss had taken her liberties with her. Not only that, but she also used charming techniques on her. Should she be joyous that she played the role of a man extremely convincingly? Clear Phoenix's eyes suddenly flashed with coldness. When Mei Ru Yin saw this, her enchanting smile changed into dread. Her figure flashed, and in seconds, she was kneeling on the floor. Hushi turned around to see Gu Liufeng's laughing face and couldn't help and fix him a glare as well. Gu Lufeng caught his expression and lowly coughed when he saw her glare. Carrying on with the introduction, he pointed at a person standing behind Mei Ru Yin and Chunbai and said, "This person is the shopkeeper of Intoxicated Immortal House." Gu Lufeng pointed at someone and continued, "His name is Wei Shao, and he's a famous spiritual cook in Yinjing City. But, naturally, his cooking can't compare to little Yuer's." He pointed at another person. "This is the leader of the squadron that guards the inner imperial palace, Zhang de Sheng." Finally, this is Zhou Huayan, who's in charge of Shang de Hall's western branch. He's Yinin's younger brother and is a second-rank doctor. After he finished introducing the 5 people to Hushi, Gu Liufeng's expression deepened as he looked at the 5 people kneeling on the floor. "Today, I gathered the 5 of you here today because there is something that has to be announced. The person standing by my side is called Shiyu. From this day onwards, she is our master. A1, Maitreya, the bodhisattva that'll appear on Earth in the future. Some more information can be found here. https://en. Wikipedia. org/wiki/Maitreya 2 Nujia, a humble way to reference oneself for females. The build-up before the climax had been immense, but Gu Liufeng's words were few when they finally reached the top. But nevertheless, his few words shocked the 5 people kneeling on the floor, who turned to each other with looks of dismay at his revelation. Each of their faces carried shock and disbelief. Chunbai, whose cultivation was the highest, couldn't help but ask, "Young master, why do you say that this youngster is our master?" "The reason is that I've already decided to follow Shiyu and regard her as my master. If you no longer wish to follow me, then you're allowed to leave. However, if you wish to continue staying by my side, then you need to put her in your heart, in a position that's even higher than mine. Moreover, you also have to respect and listen to her." Filled with disbelief, Bai Chun blurted out, "But she's only at foundation establishment stage." The five of them had been by Gu Liufeng's side for so long. Between them, there existed a strong bond of camaraderie, as well as the fact that they all deeply respected Gu Liufeng's strength and methods. Gu Lufeng was at the summit of Gold Core stage, but what did the youngster in front of them count as? She was nothing more than an insignificant foundation establishment stage martial artist. Yet he, Gu Lufeng, expected them to bow and submit to her? Don't even talk about Chen Bai, this high-level expert that felt disdain toward this thought. Even the male resembling Maitreya had a disdainful expression painted on his face. Gu Liufeng's eyes deepened, and he coldly stated, "Regardless of Shiyu's cultivation, I still stand by my words. If you wish to continue following by my side, then you must regard Shiyu as your master from now on. If you don't wish to do so, you can voluntarily leave." Chenbai and the rest of them had shock painted across their faces when they heard Gu Liufeng's words. They wanted to argue some more, but as always, they were blocked by the respect they held for Gu Lufeng and didn't dare speak out. But the gazes they directed toward Hushi were all filled with questions and resentment. In their minds, they were all wondering if this youth, who was even more beautiful than a woman, used his beautiful looks to seduce young master, causing young master to become confused and hand over all of the power in his hands to the youth. Hushi looked at their expressions and knew that they didn't have complete trust in herself. The only thing hindering them from flaring up was the respect they held for Gu Lufeng. A shallow smile appeared on her face as she stepped forward to slowly say, "I know that you don't fully accept me. Today, my mood is good, so I'll offer you guys an opportunity." "What opportunity?" The questioning voice just sounded out when purple vines suddenly shot out from Hushi's hand. They resembled lightning strikes, as they all struck the ground, one after another. The only sounds that could be heard were, voila. On the floor, cracks, similar to a spider web, began to appear on the floor, with the one in the middle being the deepest one. Hushi sneered, "Whoever feels discontent can step out now. Regardless of whether you decide to fight together, in a group, or fight one-on-one, and regardless of what methods you use, as long as you can defeat the purple whips in my hand, I'll have Gu Lufeng take his decision back. How about it?" Hushi was actually downplaying the whipping, but it still caused the five people's complexions to change. The ones whose expressions were most affected were Zhang Desheng and Zhou Huayan. They were 100% positive that they would be unable to produce such sounds, even if they had the same whip. But Chen Bai, who had the highest cultivation out of all of them, had a gloomy face as he stepped out and declared, "I don't accept." This person was nothing more than a trifling foundation establishment stage martial artist. Yet, when he was handed a high-level weapon, he immediately turned unbridled. He was at Gold Core stage and the leader of a mercenary group. How could he possibly be scared by this? The purple vines in Hushi's hands softly swayed as Hushi sneered, "Let my words be marked. Today, my mood is good, therefore, I'm offering you guys a chance to provoke me. But if you lose today, in the future, you can no longer act rude towards me. Otherwise, don't blame me if I'm rude." While she was speaking, the purple vine unexpectedly transformed into 5 separate roots and went in the direction of the 5 people. "Don't dawdle. It'd be better if all 5 of you went up at once. This way, we can avoid having you all go one at a time, and my time won't be wasted." When the 5 people heard what she had said, all of their expressions turned unsightly. Hushi's unbridled manner showed that she looked down upon them. In fact, she seemed to not even put them in her eyes. Bai Chun and Mei Ru Yin both exchanged glances with each other. Soon after, Bai Chun let out an earth-shattering scream and a large, golden knife suddenly appeared in his hands. And Mei Ru Yan's hands suddenly transformed into multicolored silks, tightly encasing everyone in a bubble. Bai Chen's large knife was also covered by the multicolored silks, facing toward Hushi as it whistled with cold air. Similarly, Wei Dexiao and Zhang Desheng each took out the weapons they were most proud of and stood to the side, closely watching the scene in front of them. If Hushi were to expose any hole on her end, they would immediately jump in and help. Hushi looked at the sharp blade and the 4 satin fabrics flying toward her, and to everyone's surprise, she didn't reveal fright. Instead, she had a leisurely smile on her face. Her footing on the ground loosened a bit as she prepared herself. Moments later, her body lifted off the ground as she soared in the air. The purple vines simultaneously flew into the air with her, choosing to revolve around her entire body. In regards to the weapons flying toward its owner, it merely let out 2 shrieks, and Mei Ru Yan's multicolored silks immediately broke into pieces, falling apart. Warm sunshine lay scattered across her peerlessly white, jade-like face, slightly blinding her gleaming, phoenix eyes. The pieces of the multicolored silks danced in the breeze, surrounding her whilst they slowly drifted to the floor. This scene caused Hushi to look like an immortal fairy descending upon earth. Bai Chen's knife was still frozen in front of her face, mere inches away from pushing forward and forever scarring her. But what happened moments later caused him to turn stupefied, completely forgetting about harming Hushi. This was because the youth that was just in front of him mere moments before suddenly disappeared without a trace. The only remaining pieces of evidence that the youth was there at all was Mei Ru Yan's shocked face and the tattered remains of her silks still fluttering in the air. As for that youth, who was the target of his sword, she was just like a fairy, coming to nimbly rest at the very tip of his knife. She stood alone, looking down on him. Under her arrogant gaze, he found himself feeling lowly, as if he was someone without any power or ability to rebel against her. To the side, Wei Dexiao and Zhang Desheng were still feebly holding onto their weapons. For a moment, they couldn't retreat nor could they advance, so they were left not knowing what to do. Hushi stood on the edge of Chun Bai's sword with 1 foot. Her expression was calm, as if she wouldn't be caught off guard, regardless of any situation she faced. When she opened her mouth to speak, her voice was strong. "I'm very disappointed in you guys. If we were truly fighting, you guys would have already died multiple deaths under my hands. However, you guys didn't even recognize that your lives were circling around the entrance to the gates of hell." Once she finished speaking, she jumped into the air again before softly landing back on the ground. Her black, satiny hair flew up when she did and softly fell back down once she landed. Her hair's movement caused a faint, aromatic smell to linger in the air, sending confusion into everyone's mind and seducing their souls. Gu Lufeng, who stood by her side, couldn't help but press his temples and look away from her. He worried that he would be unable to help himself if he kept looking, scared that he would be unable to stop himself from merely wanting her by his side, from being unable to stop himself from letting her never leave, and from being unable to stop himself from gathering her in his embrace. She was such a beautiful, dazzling, and unrivaled woman. It was no wonder that even His Highness King of Hell couldn't free himself from her charms. When Hushi landed on the ground, she coldly gazed at the stomachs of Bai Chen and the others. Once Bai Chen returned to his senses, he curiously bowed his head to have a look at what Hushi was looking at. Once he caught sight of what was in front of him, his face transformed and was filled with shock. This provoked everyone else's curiosity, so they all looked down and saw that each of them had a purple mark on the left side of the chest. This was evidently the doing of the purple vine that was currently wrapped around Hushi's hand. It was clear that, if Hushi were to wish to kill them, she could have very easily caused them an unnatural death during their fight, just then. The death would have been so sudden that they wouldn't have even had time to retaliate before it was over. Hushi withdrew her purple abyss vine and smiled. "What? Is there still someone who's unwilling to accept?" Suddenly, the second courtyard turned quiet and tranquil, and even the sound of breathing couldn't be heard anymore. Bai Chen broke the silence by bending down on his knee and clearly saying, "Subordinate Bai Chen pays respects to master." This time, his voice was willing and didn't hold any traces of unwillingness or questions. Although the youth in front of them was only at foundation establishment stage, She was actually able to leave all 5 of them, martial artists at Meridian Stage, completely powerless. With this God-given talent and strength alone, she was fully qualified to be their master. Following by Qin's lead, Mei Ruyin, Wei Deshao, Zhang Desheng, and Zhou Huayan all uniformly kneeled down and loudly said, paying respects to master. Hashi nodded in response and asked each of them to repeat their jobs as well as the subordinates under them. Her main focus at the moment was the troops that Bai Chen lead. After all, on Miluo continent, one's fist was what determined who got the last word. As it turns out, the troops were made up of about 50 to 60 people. Among them, 80% were at Foundation Establishment stage, and the remaining 20% were at the initial stage of Meridian Stage. The troops usually took missions from the black market. This way, they earned profit and also, conveniently, promoted their strength. By now, they had become somewhat well known in the black market for their work. Hashi said to Chen Bai, pick out 4 experts at Meridian Stage and have them stand guard in Shangda Hall for a period of time. Chen Bai replied, young master has already informed me of this matter. This afternoon, those 4 people will report to Shangda Hall, asking master to rest assured. Hashi contemplated something for a moment before ultimately deciding to take a bottle of pills and threw them over to Bai Chen, instructing him, this counts as compensation for your troops being short 4 people. Give this to people who are at high-level Foundation Establishment stage. In under a year, they'll be able to break through to Meridian Stage. Chunbai caught the bottle of pills and was just about to ask Hashi what these were for. But when he heard what she said, he was suddenly speechless. Coincidentally, Zhou Yinan walked into the second courtyard at the same time and caught sight of Bai Chen's speechless expression. Laughing, he said, Chen Shtong, you've received a large profit. The pills in your hand right now are top-quality second-rank Ning Yuan pill. It's the holy pill that's the best for martial artists hoping to break through to Meridian Stage. If this pill were to be brought to Shangda Hall to be sold at 100,000 yuan crystals, people would still be breaking each other's heads just to get one. I didn't expect that you would get an entire bottle of these pills from Gongzi for merely giving out 4 martial artists at Meridian Stage. At first, Bai Chen's face was wooden as he gripped the bottle of pills in his hand. Then after a moment, his face lit up with joy and he knelt down. Many thanks to Master for bestowing these pills. Mei Ruyin and the others all looked at the porcelain bottle in Qin Bai's hands with envy. Each one of them wished to rush over there and snatch that bottle away from him. None of them doubted that Hashi refined these pills themselves, but they also knew that it was impossible for someone merely at Foundation Establishment stage to refine a pill like this. After all, martial artists at that stage couldn't even create their own spiritual fire. They could only rely on outside sources for a spiritual fire. Furthermore, if someone at that level were to refine a pill this method, refining a pill that had an essence purity of 60% or higher was impossible. Hashi saw each person turn to look over at her. Under their burning gazes, she hesitated for a moment before taking out storage rings and throwing one at each of them. We'll consider these rings as today's first meeting gift. In the future, work hard. Regardless of whether it's pills or treasures, there'll be many in store for you guys. After she finished speaking, she turned to Gu Lufeng and waved her hand. Their 2 figures flashed and 2 streaks could faintly be seen heading toward the transmission array. Their abrupt departure was due to the fact that Gu Yulan's drug addiction was soon going to flare up again. Hashi was racing back with Gu Lufeng in order to treat it. The 5 people left behind silently watched Hashi's departing figure. Hashi's departure was so sudden it left them momentarily speechless. Soon after, someone used their divine knowledge to explore the storage ring and an Aya was heard soon after that. So many treasures. There are even attack charms. Mei Ruyin took out a small bell that was about the size of a palm and remarked with a trembling voice, This is a dreaming soul bell. It's the best attack weapon for martial artists practicing demonic techniques. The few people looked at each other in dismay. They had been shocked by their family's new master's liberalness with money. Zhou Huayan swallowed his saliva. Gu, do you know why we've suddenly received a new master? Why would young master rely on him? Moreover, it's rumored that the new pills Shangda Hall has been selling lately have all been brought in by him. This person wouldn't be an aristocrat of some large, influential family, right? Zhou Yinan curled his lip and darkly replied, "You're surprised by this? If they were to know that the top-quality and high-ranked pills being sold in Shengda Hall were all single-handedly refined by Shigongzi, wouldn't they be scared to death? But this fact was truly too important. Even if all the people in front of him were trustworthy, Zhou Yinan still didn't dare to say anything. He merely coughed under his breath and said, "This Shigongzi is the same genius Dr. Shi that I told you guys about previously. He has given our master a great favor. Not only has he helped master bring his mother out of Murong family's grip, he's even slowly helping heal her of her sickness. It can be said that young master's life is Shigongzi's, so naturally, our lives are also Shigongzi's. In the future, we must treat Shigongzi as our true master." After saying this, Zhou Yinan pointed at the porcelain bottle in Chunbai's hands and said, "Trust me, as long as you guys listen to Gongzi's words, the benefits you'll have in the future will be boundless." Everyone looked at the porcelain bottle in Chanbai's hands, and suddenly their gazes were burning again. If Shigongzi were to give them a similar top-quality pill, then their rank upgrade would be just around the corner. Once they returned to Shengda Hall, Hashi immediately began to treat Gu Yulan. Again, she injected her and transferred a bit of her wooden attribute's spiritual power to her. After this, Gu Yulan woke up for a period of time, completely bewildered. She caught sight of Hashi and instantly seemed to turn teary-eyed, mumbling incoherent things under her breath. But because cold food pills' influence on her wisdom was too large, she fell unconscious again shortly after she opened her eyes. After washing her hands, Hashi walked outside to a pavilion with Gu Lufeng. When she saw his grave and worried expression, she couldn't help but begin to comfort him. "Don't worry, your mother's wisdom has already improved a little. Because this type of poison slowly corrodes, recovering her wisdom will also be slow, thus causing the process to be challenging. We can only slowly go through the suffering. But luckily, your mother has already passed through the most challenging stage." When Gu Lufeng heard Hashi's words, he couldn't help but smile. "To have little Yue, who's both a genius doctor and my master, treat my mother, what do I have to worry about?" Hashi looked at his demonically charming expression and gleaming peach blossom eyes. His entire person felt as if it had returned to its languid and rascally self that was present in sealed dragon domain. But what was different from then and now was that he was no longer wearing a mask, and the grief and melancholy that once resided at the bottom of his eyes was gone. It was evident that he had let go of his previous sorrows. When he saw Hashi closely staring at him without speaking, Gu Lufeng lowly coughed and suddenly smiled. "Little Shuer, it can't be seen, but you're quite liberal with your money towards this subordinate's people. Ah, I saw the charms that you gave Qinbai and the others. I'm telling you, those are worth 70 or 80 million yuan crystals. But little Shuer, you can't favor one and discriminate the other. Ah, I'm still the first person to follow you, right? Speaking of this, how come everyone else has had a first meeting gift, including Zhou Yinan, but I haven't gotten mine?" While Gu Lufeng was speaking these words, he was leaning on one of the pavilion's pillars. His mouth was faintly lifted into a ghost of a smile, and his peach blossom eyes were full of joy. His entire person emitted an outstanding aura that couldn't be properly described, yet the words he spoke were that of a spoilt child that was throwing a tantrum. Hashi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and looked at him with a blank glance. "You're at the summit of Gold Core stage, and I'm only at low-level Foundation Establishment stage. What treasures could I have on my hand that could catch your eye?" Gu Lufeng didn't respond to her. He only mildly laughed in response and unblinkingly looked at her with a burning gaze. Hashi felt increasingly uncomfortable under his gaze, and with a flick of her wrist, 2 storage rings appeared in between them. She threw them to him and unhappily said, "Don't speak. I want to bully you the same way you just bullied me." Gu Lufeng took a look inside the storage rings and found that both of them were filled with crystal stones. Moreover, the lowest rank was a second-rank crystal stone. With the 2 storage rings combined, there seemed to be about 70 to 80 million crystals. He laughed and said, "Master, is this your plan? To use your coins and crush your subordinate to death?" Hashi cast him a glance. "Your job is to properly help the 4 people. arriving at Shangda Hall this afternoon. Adjust? I hope that they can cause people to cower at the sight of them by the time they go out and control the crowds tomorrow. Hushi mischievously laughed. Even if our military force is weak, we must smash our crystal rocks on outsiders. Then they won't dare to act blindly without thinking. Gu Lufeng took the storage rings and stored them away. A smile bloomed on his face at Hushi's words, a smile that was indolent and demonically charming. I chased for so long, yet in the end, these 2 storage rings aren't even for me. How ironic. I'm your first subordinate, yet I'm treated so. He saw Hushi fix him with a cold stare and couldn't help but rub his nose and laugh. Okay, even though I wasn't given a first meeting gift, the feeling of taking master's money and dressing up as a local tyrant and smashing people isn't too bad either. Rest assured. Wait until tomorrow. You'll see 4 golden rays flashing from swords to people who don't watch their mouths. Finished speaking, Gu Lufeng played with the storage rings in his hand before turning around to leave. He left behind Hushi, who was stood completely still. Her originally icy face transformed, and a tiny trace of pain made its way onto it. How come her originally bulging purse was reduced to half the size in just half a day's worth of work? And don't even mention the treasures she raked in during her time in Seal Dragon Domain's secret territory. Even the crystal stones she earned from selling her pills were practically all gone. Thinking some more, she also thought of how she had to buy Shijia and the others, these 10 people, clothing once they left the mountain. Just thinking of all the money she was losing pained her. Others spent money like running water. She spent money like floodwaters. Not only that, she also had to bring up numerous subordinates in the future. Zazie, it would be better for her to go exploit her family's treasure, Dandan, and refine more pills. On the second day, Shangda Hall's doorway was just as lively as the previous day. The long line stretched through the entirety of the eastern street. But what gave everyone lined up a pleasant surprise was the fact that, today, Shangda Hall decided to open shop earlier than expected. Not only that, there was a male that claimed himself as shopkeeper, who appeared in front of everyone. With a wide smile stretched across his face, he announced in front of everyone, "These last few days has been Shangda Hall's experiment with reopening business. Today, we've officially decided to reopen Shangda Hall. In order to show our thanks to everyone for their enthusiastic support over these past few days, we've decided to greatly increase the amount of pills that can be bought today, as well as the time you have to buy them." After saying this, Shi-san slightly turned around to point at the medicine cupboard. On the cupboard, there were various porcelain bottles, all neatly arranged. Today, we've made 3,000 best quality pills and 10,000 top quality pills available for purchase. Among this is also 100 second-ranked best quality pills. Of course, in the future and depending on the situation, we may decide to release a few third-ranked best quality pills to the public. Once Shi-san's final words were out in the open, the raptly listening crowd immediately exploded and everyone's voices could be heard speaking at once. Second-ranked and third-ranked best quality pills? That implied that these pills would have significant results on Meridian Stage and Gold Core Stage martial artists. Even nascent Soul Stage martial artists could receive some benefits from these pills. Moreover, this could all occur without any poisoning. Just what type of best quality holy pill was this, ah? All of the martial artists behind you also bore through the night, just as you did. If we were to let you take away all of the best quality pills, how would we be deserving of their support? Shi-san's response caused appreciation and happiness to rise in the martial artists lined up behind this group. Those people from influential families were arrogant and domineering, often cutting in line. Over these past 7 days, all the pills had been taken away by them. So even though they had waited in line for so long, their chances of being able to buy even 1 or 2 pills were low. Shi-san's actions today were clearly in consideration towards them, martial artists who didn't have much of a family background. How could they not be moved to tears? When the old man heard Shi-san's words, he felt absolutely infuriated. Turning around, he waved at the guards behind him and bellowed out orders. "Ruthlessly lecture this youth for me and rob all of the remaining pills. I want to see if Shangda Hall has gotten lofty aspirations after eating a leopard's bladder, since they actually dare to face off against our Huangfu family." When the crowd saw those 7 to 8 martial artists were just about to rush toward Shisan, each one of their faces showed anxiousness. But Shisan was completely calm and merely raised his hands up and clapped once. In the blink of an eye, everyone felt as if they saw a golden streak flashing by, nearly blinding them as it passed. After a moment, when everyone composed themselves and focused more on those streaks of light, they saw that 4 martial artists at Meridian's stage had positioned themselves in front of Shisan. If it were only martial artists at Meridian's stage, nobody would bat much of an eye. However, what caught everyone's attention were the things on their body. Each person had the same set of 4th-rank defense clothes: flying light sword, flowing light boots, and assembling spirit jade hat. When these 4 people appeared, everyone felt as if they were looking at glittering lights, and everyone's eyes were brightened in shock. For a moment, it was absolutely silent in front of Shangda Hall. Even the fiendish old man and his several guards were shocked speechless. That was actually a full set of 4th-ranked clothes, ah? Even one piece of those clothes would be worth about 1,000,000 yuan crystals. If the whole suit were to be calculated, you wouldn't be able to beat it without at least 20 million yuan crystals. Huangfu family's old housekeeper's face was filled with shock and bewilderment. These were nothing more than guards for a medicinal hall, yet they actually wore clothes that cost upwards of 10 million yuan crystals. Even the rich and imposing Huangfu family would be reluctant to do so. Just who was the new master of Shangda Hall? In moments, the people who wanted to take advantage of this crisis for their own personal gains and argue against Shangda Hall's new stipulations no longer dared to act rashly. This large show showed how big a hand Shangda Hall's new master had. Everyone now believed that this new master must have come out of a large sect or large influential family, and collectively decided not to act rashly without understanding everything about the situation. After successfully passing this 7 days test, Shangda Hall was officially opening for business, and naturally, it was doing exceptionally well. Over the following days, the medicinal hall's newly hired servants' feet barely touched the ground. They barely had the time to spare effort to drink their saliva and pant. Each day, shopkeeper Zhou and Shisan were all smiles as they busied themselves with watching the rising income. By contrast, Jishang Hall, which had been full of people just days before, now sat unfrequented and incomparable to Shangda Hall. After all, their medicines couldn't compare to other medicinal halls, and their hall's doctor was only a 1st-rank doctor, whilst Zhou Yan'an was at the very least a 2nd-rank doctor. Adding on to this was the fact that Shangda Hall's reputation had always been good, better than Jishang Hall's. So, now that they were selling best quality pills, people would naturally rush to go buy from Shangda Hall. Jishang Hall's waiters, little manservants, and part-time workers all miserably looked toward the lively Shangda Hall across from them and heaved a sigh. At this moment, they suddenly saw a man that looked to be about 50 years old. His face didn't necessarily look pure as he was slowly walking into Jishang Hall. When he saw Jishang Hall's bleak and declining state, his face couldn't help but become heavy as he coldly snorted. Shopkeeper Yu, who was originally asleep at the front desk, immediately returned to his senses once he heard that cold snort. When he raised his head to look and caught sight of the old man, he seemed suddenly frightened and jumped out of his chair to welcome the visitor. "Dr. Chong, why have you come?" Dr. Gu, who was previously hiding in the back of the hall, also hurriedly rushed out to respectfully greet Dr. Chong when he heard shopkeeper Yu's words. Dr. Chong impatiently waved his hand at their greetings. Instead, he pointed at the lack of business in Jishang Hall, then turned to point at the lively Shangda Hall, who still had a long line of people waiting to enter, and coldly asked, "What happened? Master, had you come here to reopen Jishang Hall to completely suppress Shangda Hall? So much so that they wouldn't even be able to lift their heads up? Just how exactly do you guys handle things?" Dr. Gu wiped at the cold sweat on his forehead and didn't even dare to lift his eyes as he promptly replied. Replying to Dr. Chang's question, Shangda Hall recently changed masters. Ever since a new master took over, they began to sell a type of supplement spirit pill. The maximum spiritual force this best quality supplement spirit pill can contain is 12 crystals, and the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution appraised it to have an essence purity of 99%. Ever since Shangda Hall began to sell these pills, all of the customers began to line up there. Adding on to that is the fact that Zhou Yinan is a second-rank doctor and Ji Sheng Hall only has Xiaoda to oversee it. So, Dr. Gu's words were spoken very cautiously. He, alongside Ji Sheng Hall's shopkeeper and waiters, had all been directly employed to work here. The person that hired them was exactly this Dr. Chang's master. His master was a man whose clothes were gray, wore a windbreaker and cloak which covered his facial features. When the man had originally hired them, he once said that Shangda Hall's supply of pills has already been cut off. In the end, the hall would become deserted and hard to maintain. All they needed to do was open Ji Sheng Hall and properly run it, and Shangda Hall would be destroyed within a day. This person named Dr. Chang was named Chang Sheng. He was actually a fourth-rank doctor and was that gray-clothed male's trusted confidant. This Ji Sheng Hall was actually under Dr. Chang's name, so he could be considered as half of their master. Now that Ji Sheng Hall was so dismal, how could Dr. Gu not be terrified? Dr. Chang wrinkled his brows and confusion flitted past his eyes. Do you know who Shangda Hall's new master is? Terrified, Dr. Gu shook his head and said, I don't know, but I did send some of our hall's little manservants to nose around Shangda Hall. According to the information we've received, Shangda Hall's master should have a large influence. Oh. Dr. Gu choked on his saliva before replying. Shangda Hall's 4 inner hall guards all wear clothes and possess weapons that are 4th rank. If the master doesn't have a large influence, where would the big hand come from? Not only that, but I heard that a few days ago, when someone tried to create a disturbance, a gold core stage martial artist and a nascent soul stage martial artist, that nobody knows where Shangda Hall found them from, came out to suppress the person. When that deep spiritual force started pressed down, everyone immediately no longer dared to budge. Dr. Chang's eyebrows were already creased as his face fluctuated between emotions. Has anyone looked into the identity of the refining pharmacist? No. Dr. Gu shook his head and continued, but the refining pharmacist is reportedly exceptionally strong. Currently, they're selling 1st and 2nd ranked pills. In the future, they'll sell 3rd and even 4th ranked pills. If they are truly able to refine 4th ranked best quality pills, then wouldn't they, at the very least, be at Grand Master level? The ranks of refining pharmacists and doctors were completely different. The main divisions were entrance level, learner's level, pre-master level, master level, Grand Master level, Heaven's Master level, pre-ancestor level, and sacred ancestor level. But on Miluo continent, there were few who could achieve master level as refining pharmacists. There were even fewer Grandmaster refining pharmacists. If the person refining these best quality pills was truly a Grandmaster refining pharmacist, the situation would become serious. Dr. Chang's expression turned unsightly as he incoherently muttered to himself. After a while had passed, he finally clenched his teeth and said, Have you guys bought that best quality pill? Take it out so I can have a look. We haven't. Dr. Chang, you've seen with your own eyes how long the line is. We wouldn't even be able to fight for it, ah? Dr. Tang unhesitatingly said this and looked down, but nobody saw the flickering light in his eyes when he did so. He would be dumb to hand over the best quality pill he had to Dr. Chang. That pill was what he had fought others for when Shangda Hall had initially began to sell those pills, before anyone had started lining up. He still wished to use this best quality pill to advance in rank. Dr. Chang suddenly became furious and angrily yelled at the surrounding waiters and little manservants, Rubbish! You're still not going to line up and buy it for me. Ji Sheng Hall's originally lazy little manservants and waiters were shocked silly by the sudden yelling and all ran out to go buy some pills. But when they looked at the unending line, if they lined up now, would there still be time for them to buy pills? Dr. Chang's face was ashen as he coldly looked at Shangda Hall, which was sitting right across from Ji Sheng Hall. Best quality pills. He hadn't expected that the master refining pharmacist that caused such a sensation in the black market would actually work together with Shangda Hall. Originally, Shangda Hall had already been suppressed by them. It was like an arrow at the end of its flight, but right now, the most important thing wasn't Shangda Hall anymore. It was the identity of that refining pharmacist. After coldly staring at Shangda Hall for a long time, Dr. Chang suddenly began to make his way over to Shangda Hall's front desk. Once he arrived in front of Zhou Yinan, he lifted his chin and frostily demanded, "Bring me a bottle of best quality pills." Flabbergasted, Zhou Yinan raised his head to look at the man who spoke. He was completely unfamiliar, and before he had time to recognize him, the people lined up behind him already started to voice their complaints. One by one the customers began to shout, "Who are you? Ah? Don't you see us all lined up? Is it because you think you're somebody? Ah? Don't you see that even the people from influential families are lined up as well?" Dr. Chang didn't get to say anything when Ji Shang Hall's shopkeeper Yu, who had followed behind him, angrily burst out, "Presumptuous! This is our Ji Shang Hall's Dr. Chang, a doctor that the Doctors Association recognized as a fourth-ranked doctor. You guys actually want to be presumptuous toward a grand fourth-ranked doctor?" Once those words had been said, the shouting voices immediately quieted down. Fourth-ranked doctor. It was actually the same rank as Jean Ling's first doctor. Moreover, the status of a doctor was quite particular. If someone offended a doctor, they would meet countless assassination attempts. Dr. Chang looked at Zhou Yinan and quietly coughed. "What? Shopkeeper Zhou, we're both people who learn medicine. You wouldn't even be willing to give me face and sell me some pills?" Zhou Yinan didn't have time to voice his thoughts before Shi-san interrupted the conversation and impolitely said, "Dr. Chang, right? Truly embarrassing. My family's master already said, if you want to buy pills, you must wait in line for your turn. After all, the amount of pills we have is limited, and there are a vast amount of customers. If we were to prioritize you and sell a bottle to you, it would be unjust toward the people all lining up. Am I right?" Shi-san and Zhou Yinan were different. Shi-san had no concept of a doctor's status. Shi-san only recognized one thing, which was that his family's young miss was the most awesome. Whatever nonsense doctor wouldn't even be fit to carry Hushi's shoes. Once Shi-san's words came out, the martial artists all lined up behind that were angry but didn't dare to speak all felt incomparably carefree. On the other hand, Dr. Chang's face became extremely unsightly, but maintaining a doctor's reputation stopped him from lashing out. All he could do was angrily fling his sleeves as he turned to leave. Before he returned back to Jisheng Hall, he turned back around to look at everyone surrounding Shengda Hall once last time and ground his teeth, inwardly saying, "Very good, Shengda Hall. You actually dare to slight me, so don't blame me if I'm impolite. Later you'll taste how it feels." Shi-san disdainfully cast a glance at Dr. Chang's exiting figure and turned to everyone to clearly say, "Everyone rest assured. We, Shengda Hall, are a medicinal hall that sets out to aid the world and save the people. We believe in fairness. If anyone wants to walk in here and receive special treatment, you'll have to see if our Shengda Hall's guards agree with you." Shi-san's speech led to a burst of enthusiastic cheering from everyone. Shengda Hall had always promised fairness and equality, and over these past few days, they had consistently delivered on their promises. Regardless of whether it was people of the imperial family or aristocrats, whenever someone wanted to cut in line, Shengda Hall's guards were quick to lecture them. Even gold core stage martial artists weren't an exception. Holding such a strong position in fairness and equality would, no doubt, offend many influential people. However, Shengda Hall remained calm in the face of fear and continued to stand upright. This attitude caused countless common martial artists to hold an extremely favorable impression of Shengda Hall in their hearts. In the future, when others decide stand against Shengda Hall, there would always be an overwhelming amount of support for Shengda Hall. But this was something that would happen later. 3 days after Dr. Chang had been angered into leaving, a group of angry people suddenly rushed into Shengda Hall. Before giving everyone time to react, the leader of the angry group ruthlessly overturned the front desk. The rest of the people in the group pushed everyone aside and shouted, "Move aside! Move aside! Have you not seen who has arrived? Open your eyes, it's our Morong family's third young master." Someone suddenly resentfully shouted from the crowd, "What's going on with Morong family? Aren't other aristocrats obediently lined up here? Shengda Hall already announced that you must line up if you want to buy pills. Why are you making such a ruckus?" When the leader of the group heard the shouts, he coldly sneered, "Line up? Haha, that really is a joke as big as the sky. I've never heard of a master needing to line up in their own shop. Youngster, have you grown brains yet? I will let you learn today. When he finished speaking, his subordinates rushed over, and without waiting for people to react, they knocked the martial artist, who was speaking, down to the ground and began to step all over and kick at his legs and feet. At this moment, Shang Dahal's guards finally reacted and rushed over, intending to drive these people out. But the people who arrived were actually high-level Meridian stage martial artists. Not only that, they all had high-quality magic weapons. Momentarily, the four guards stopped. They could only blankly watch on as they overturned those few Foundation establishment guards and took all of the pills at the front desk. All of the surrounding martial artists, who were watching this group steal, felt injustice rise in them, and some of them wanted to lend a helping hand. The large person that headed the group merely sneered. "What are you guys doing? I'm telling you, if you dare to make a move, don't even think about buying a thing from Shangda Hall in the future." "Why? What are you worth?" The large person didn't get to respond before he heard a male's cold voice sound out from the doorway. "Based on the fact that I'm this place's owner." They saw that the male looked to be about 20 years old. He had a beautiful appearance, but his eyes were steely and his face was harsh. His hands were clasped behind his back as he slowly walked to the front. Coldly laughing, he said, "This entire Shangda Hall is my Morong family's. Tell me, on what basis would I not be able to ban you from buying Shangda Hall's things?" "Impossible. Shangda Hall's master doesn't even have the surname Morong. What evidence do you have that says Shangda Hall is Morong family's?" "But I heard that Shangda Hall's previous master was Gu Lufeng, who is actually someone from Morong family. Could it be that the people who purchased Shangda Hall is actually Morong family?" This. When the large man that headed the group saw everyone's bewildered state, he couldn't help but insolently laugh out. Pointing at the people who had just spoken rudely to him, he said, You, and also you. Don't you guys want to buy pills? I won't make things difficult for you guys. As long as you crawl under my crotch and then kowtow to our third young master, I'll let you buy pills. What do you say?" As he spoke, he pointed at his own crotch with a face full of haughtiness and arrogance. The three people he called out were as red as a tomato. They all waved their sleeves and turned to leave. But this aggressive group was like a cat teasing a mouse. They seemed to insist on wanting to humiliate the three men as they forced them to kneel on the ground, and seemed to offer them only the option of crawling under the large man's crotch. The three people were extremely vexed, and their whole bodies shook as they struggled to get free. But despite their struggling, the fact was that they were only at Foundation establishment stage, and furthermore, they were one person versus multiple. How could they be Morong family's opponents? The several people that held the three men down all burst into laughter. "For us to let you crawl under our leader's crotch is us looking highly upon you. As long as you obediently crawl and kowtow in apology to our third young master, we'll give you a whole bottle of pills after." Everyone saw the three people almost nearing the large man's crotch when suddenly a sword flashed like lightning as it struck something. The large man that had previously been lifting his leg in preparation for those three men to crawl under him suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. He sang "I" arrogantly. Soon after, blood began to quickly flow out of his crotch area. The person who was arrogant just moments before was now rolling about on the floor and wailing in pain. Who was it? The young man who had been called third young master of the Morong family had been scared stupid by the sudden scene before him. But soon after, he became angry and hot-blooded again. "You even dare to attack this young master's people? Are you tired of living?" As soon as he voiced his questions, he saw two men come out of Shangda Hall's inner courtyard's doors. The male was walking slightly ahead of the other workhorse, hemp clothes, and he looked to be no more than about 16 or 17 years old. His lips were red and his teeth were white. He was incomparably beautiful. However, from head to toe, no spiritual power fluctuations could be sensed throughout his entire body, yet his eyes seemed to carry frostiness, causing people to feel cold. The person following behind the youth had a slender figure and common looks. He emitted a faintly detectable powerful force that pressed down on people once he arrived. In his hands, he held a sword, clear evidence that he was the one who had just acted against the large man. Naturally, these two people were Hushi and Gu Lufeng. Today, Shisan was the one overlooking the hall. When he saw that the circumstances were turning for the worst, he immediately made the decision to run into the inner courtyard and bring Hushi and Gu Lufeng out. On Gu Lufeng's face, he wore a special human skin mask, so other people were unable to recognize him. Hushi looked at the fellow that proclaimed himself as the third young master of the Morong family and sneered at him. "What are you? You don't even recognize me? You actually dare to appear in Shengda Hall?" The youth burst into laughter before continuing. "Listen properly. I'm called Morong Qianjian, a Morong Manor's third young master. This Shengda Hall is my Morong family's property, so naturally it's my property as well. You little bast even dare to move against me. You're simply too impatient to continue living. I'm telling you, if you're sensitive, you would obediently kneel down and apologize to me right now. Otherwise, in the future, I'll have you blacklisted from Shengda Hall. When that happens, don't even talk about medicine. We wouldn't even sell some grass to you." "Ha ha ha!" Hushi coldly looked at the arrogant youth as if she were looking at a dead person. Even if she knew that there were countless children that belonged to Morong family that couldn't be publicly seen, calling the idiot in front of her a straw bag would be elevating his status. Gu Lufeng neared Hushi's side and quietly whispered, "Morong Qianjian one, apart from his name, is a brainless and an unskilled straw bag. I'm afraid that he's but a tool that someone instigated to come here and cause a ruckus in order to dig information out of us." Hushi sneered at his words. "Seeing as this garbage has actually come annoyed me, there's no need to send him back in good condition." When Morong Qianjian saw Hushi and Gu Lufeng whispering to each other, he thought that it was due to the fact that they were intimidated by him. Immediately, he became haughtier and increasingly rampant. "Damn, my letting you kowtow and apologize is my giving you face. Since you're hesitating to something unless you're forced, small ones, come slaughter these youngsters for me. You'll be heavily rewarded for it. See these pills? You can have as many as you want." The guards behind Morong Qianjian all enthusiastically cheered, and each one of them threw themselves at Hushi like fiends. But before they could even near her, everyone saw a light sword rising in the air. Once the light sword was in the air, it split into a dozen or so separate swords and rushed toward each of the guards. After a moment, all that people heard were loud pong sounds. Before everyone could collect their thoughts, those fiends already had fright painted all over their faces as they foolishly looked at their abdomens. All they saw was a large gaping hole in their abdomen area. Blood was gushing out of it, and they could even faintly make out their internal organs in the blood. Those people's eyes were full of amazement and despair, but before they could utter their last words, they fell onto the ground with a thump and lost their lives. For a few moments, it was completely silent within Shengda Hall. Everyone looked at the male holding the sword with gazes full of shock. He didn't look to be particularly outstanding and his spiritual power fluctuations weren't very obvious. Yet he was actually an expert at Gold Core stage. Faced with this unforeseen circumstance, Morong Qianjian's face was deathly pale. His guards had actually been cleanly slaughtered in an instant during this face-off. Not knowing what to do, he looked around at everyone. Suddenly, he felt the porcelain bottle that he had just snatched minutes before and was filled with happiness again. Running over to the people standing at the end of the line, he loudly said in front of everyone, You guys, any one of you guys, as long as you can help me capture those two youngsters, my Shengda Hall will give you an unlimited supply of pills in the future." When Morong Qianjian said these words, many people in the crowd looked at the full porcelain bottle in his hands and felt moved. Are third young master's words serious? When Morong Qianjian saw people genuinely responding to his announcement, he felt overwhelmed with joy and confidently answered back, "Of course, this young master has already previously stated that this Shengda Hall is my Morong family's business." He looked down at the crowd and saw that many people were still hesitating, and then looked back over at Gu Lufeng, who had just picked up the flying sword and felt incredibly anxious. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Zhou Yinan, who had just walked out and felt overjoyed. Toward Zhou Yinan, he arrogantly said, "I recognize you. You You're that dog slave that follows Morong Liufeng's side, right? I heard that there's third-ranked pills in Shengda Hall. Quick, bring them out for this young master. All he got in response was Zhou Yinan's cold and angry face staring back at him, not speaking nor moving. Morong Qianjian suddenly became extremely angry and began to abuse him. Damn thing. Did you not hear what this young master said? Still not running to bring third-ranked pills for me? Do you trust me when I say that I'll have you kicked out of Shengda Hall? Zhou Yinan's character had always been that of a nobleman, upright and proper. At this moment, even though he had been angered so thoroughly he was shaking and his face was icy cold, his words still held courtesy when he said, "Forgive me, it's hard to comply." What did you say? Morong Qianjian became so angry he began to look at him with hate-filled eyes and rained down curses. Dog slave. Is it that you want to rebel? You won't even listen to my words? Zhou Yinan deeply breathed and pushed down the anger that was bubbling forth in his heart and coldly said, Shengda Hall has never been Morong Manor's business. It never has been, and it never will be. Morong Qianjian furiously said, Don't think that I don't know that Shengda Hall is Morong Liufeng's. Although that bast Morong Lufeng is useless, he's still my Morong family's person. I say, this Shengda Hall is Morong family's business. Where am I wrong? Zhou Yinan sneered at him as anger became increasingly apparent in his eyes. First of all, we only know that our previous master was called Gu Lufeng, not Morong Lufeng. So, I'm not sure what relationship Morong family would have with us. Secondly, this Shengda Hall has already been passed out to another person by our previous master. Furthermore, this young Gongzi is Shengda Hall's master's trusted aide and currently deals with all of Shengda Hall's matters. Your Morong family's endless pestering lacks all reasoning. When Morong Qianjian heard what was said, he became enraged. Bullshit. You saying it's transferred means it's transferred? Who in Yinjing City doesn't know that Gu Lufeng is Morong Lufeng? Did he ask for Morong family's consent when he transferred ownership of the shop? As long as Morong family doesn't agree, this transfer doesn't count. What bullshit, Gongzi? It's best for him to obediently leave. Otherwise, if they provoke my Morong family, there won't be many good things happening to them. After saying that, he took the porcelain bottle and turned to face everyone lined up outside Shengda Hall and loudly yelled, Did you guys clearly hear what I said? Quickly come and teach a lesson to these two youngsters. As long as you do as I say, there will be boundless pills for you. Morong Qianjian still hadn't finished speaking when a light sword streaked across. Morong Qianjian's mouth was still moving, but his head had flown up into the air. Fright slowly appeared in his eyes as he looked down at his headless body that was spewing blood everywhere. After that, he forever lost consciousness. Gu Lufeng leisurely came over to retrieve his sword and smiled. Is there anyone else that wishes to replace our family's Gongzi as master of Shengda Hall? The people from influential families, who had been restless up until now, kept quiet out of fear and didn't even dare to speak half a word. Shisan walked over to the crowd with a face full of smiles. Everybody, Yanjing City prohibits fighting, but everyone here clearly saw that we were the victims today. This group of people were the first to act against us. When the Imperial Guard comes to investigate, everyone has to help us out. In addition, in order to make up for the fright everyone just received, the amount of pills available for purchase today is up by 10%. Once Shisan made this announcement, everyone felt overjoyed at the news and immediately threw all matters related to the fight to the very back of their minds. The amount of pills available to be sold was just increased by 10%. This meant that their chances of buying pills also became larger. Hushi slowly made her way over to the four martial artists that had been humiliated and beaten by Morong Qianjian and threw out a few pill bottles to them. The four people woodenly accepted the bottle. Soon after, they opened the lids and sucked in a breath. Heavens! It was actually best quality pills. 3 whole best quality pills? The four people held onto the pills with shaking hands. The martial artist who had been beaten first said with a trembling voice, What did we do to deserve this? This is what you deserve. Hushi indifferently continued explaining, It's also to express thanks for you for protecting Shengda Hall. The four people looked at each other and felt overjoyed. But They all felt that they had just bumped into unexpected good luck. The martial artists waiting in line outside were so vexed they pounded their chests. If they had known earlier, they would have helped out Shang Hall just then. They would have been the first person to rush up. That was 3 best quality pills, ah. Chapter 452 Nalan Family's Thoughts and Reality. Hushi wasn't actually at nascent soul stage, but she did have Wu Xian, her personal guard, that was at nascent soul stage. She had Wu Xian pour intense spiritual power into a jade slip. This type of pressure from spiritual power contained a nascent soul stage's power within it. However, common martial artists' mind states were completely different from martial artists at nascent soul stage, even if the martial artist was at gold core stage. Therefore, it would be impossible for them to fight against the pressure from a nascent soul stage's spiritual power. But Hushi was not the ordinary martial artist. She had a primal chaos dantian which, in itself, naturally had spiritual power that far surpassed common martial artists. Adding on to the fact that her divine knowledge was especially strong and her mental strength had been trained in the Zijin Palace. So, if she wished to offset the pressure Wu Xian's spiritual power gave her, it was quite simple for her. Briefly releasing the pressure in front of that crowd would be sufficient enough to send fear into those martial artists' hearts, and for a short amount of time, it would prevent people from intentionally provoking Shang Hall. Nalan Manor, study room. At this moment, the study room only had 2 people inside, Nalan Zhengze and Nalan family's 3rd elder, Nalan Chengming, who was sitting opposite to him. The atmosphere inside the study was extremely still. In front of the 2 people, there was a best quality repairing spirit pill that had just been bought by a subordinate from Shang Hall. With a grave expression, Nalan Chengming picked up the pill and said, "You're certain that this pill and that slut, cough, and the ones that woman left behind are the same?" Nalan Zhengze shook his head and replied, "Not entirely. This pill's essence purity and spiritual power is higher than the ones in Ling Yu left behind, but the smell both pills contain are very similar." Nalan Chengming ground his teeth. Could that woman have truly left behind a prescription for others? But that would be impossible. Near the time of her death, she had been closely monitored by us. Or could it be that that child, which had been unaccounted for at that time, had received all of Ling Yu's remnants? Nalan Zhengze shook his head, and with a heavy voice he asked, asking 3rd Elder to help investigate this Shang Hall's master's identity. "You also know that 1st Elder never came back after going to Seal Dragon Domain's secret territory. Nowadays, I can only trust you, 3rd Elder." When he thought about Nalan Yinming going missing in Seal Dragon Domain's secret territory, Nalan Chengming's face held annoyance. Now, the only remaining gold core stage martial artists in Nalan family are you and I. If we continue on like this, how will we maintain our position as one of the 4 biggest families? You're the clan head. Do you think there's any way to revive Nalan family? If there isn't, I think it's better to abdicate. Nalan Zhengze felt his forehead throbbing. His eyes turned overcast and ruthless waves of light flashed through it. But by the time he raised his head, his expression had turned humble. He looked like someone from a younger generation who dutifully listened to the teachings of older generations. Thanking 3rd Elder's instructions, I've already thought it through. In a few days, Ziyun complete his studies in his sect and return. When that time comes, I will bring Hushi back, who lives in B Courtyard, and let the pair of brother and sister have a reunion. Nalan Chengming's eyebrows rose, and soon after, he let out a meaningful laugh. That's right, they're brother and sister. Naturally, we must have them properly reunited. Perhaps we'll be able to discover something then. However, once his mind wandered to the state of Nalan family, Nalan Chengming's smiling expression immediately disappeared, and he became resentful. If you want your position as clan head to remain steady, it's best for you to retrieve that woman's prescriptions and works as soon as possible. Otherwise, at that time, you couldn't treat Ouyang Haoshuan's illness and even vowed that nobody would be able to treat it. Then, you withdrew from the marriage agreement 3rd Miss had with him. In the end, Ouyang Haoshuan is fully recovered from his illness today, and his strength is especially vigorous. Now, everyone in Yinjing City laughs that your divine doctor identity doesn't match reality. He's saying you respectfully. If outsiders find out that Nalan family's madam is insane and Nalan Zhengze, Jianling country's divine physician, can't heal the madam of her illness, I say you can forget wishing that your head position stays. Even your rank as a fourth-rank doctor would be hard to maintain. When he finished saying what he wanted to, he didn't look at Nalan Zhengze's ugly expression. Instead, he coldly snorted and flicked his sleeves before leaving. Left behind to sit alone, Nalan Zhengze's gaze rested on the flickering candle. The meat on his face pulsed as his expression turned sinister and twisted. And Lingyu, Nalan Hushi, remnants. He could definitely retrieve them. Hee. After all, he still had the most important information in his hands that he could use against her. At the same time, after having received best quality pills in the faraway Songming country's Feng family, fog and mist rose up in spirals around the mountains, like a fairy. Rich spiritual qi circulated in the mountains and forests of this area. Feng Tianba and Feng Yunjing both sat upright on one of the rocks. They were looking at a distant figure that could barely be discerned through the fog and mist. Feng Tianba was silent for a good moment. After he saw that the people inside didn't make any noise, he couldn't help but ask, "Honored sir, how is it?" For a short amount of time, it was silent amongst the clouds and mist. Then, from a distant place, a muffled voice slowly said, "The pill's level is very high. Even with my current level of cultivation, I wouldn't be able to get such a high purity. I don't doubt that a refining pharmacist that would be able to refine such a pill exists, but as far as I know, they've never made an appearance on Miluo continent." Feng Tianba and Feng Yunjing sucked in a breath when they heard those words, and both of their faces held shock. In the clouds and mist, that person carried on. "Although this pill is precious, it's a pity that what? It's pitiful that the pill's level is so low. If someone at Meridian stage took this pill, there wouldn't be much of an effect on them." The muffled voice muttered to themselves for a moment before lightly snorting, "But a person able to refine pills to this grade can't only be able to refine first-rank pills. Most likely, they're just deliberately choosing not to sell higher-ranked pills." Feng Tianba nodded his head, then asked another question. "Honored sir, may I ask what that easing tendons pill is? I scoured through countless ancient texts and couldn't find any trace of this medicine on Miluo continent. Do you think this pill is from that pill prescription that was previously rumored to be from Seal Dragon Domain?" In the mist and clouds, a voice filled with certainty immediately answered his question. "It's very probable. As far as I know, a pill used to improve martial artists' meridians hasn't appeared on Miluo continent before. Oh right. Regarding the person who inherited Seal Dragon Domain's secret territory, have you guys been able to find any information on them?" "No." Feng Tianba regretfully and guiltily shook his head in response. "We've investigated everyone who entered the secret territory, but no matter how we look at it, none of them would have had the ability or opportunity to receive Seal Dragon Domain's secret territory. Even Nangongyu, who was the strongest person to go to the secret territory that day, wouldn't have had the time to receive control of the secret territory because he spent the first half of the time with Nie Jinshen and Feng Lianying." Feng Yunjing, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly opened his mouth. "Honored sir, may I ask if this refining pharmacist could have any relation to genius Dr. Shi? Whether or not they have a connection, I'm not sure." The person concealed within the clouds and mist continued. "However, if the genius Dr. Shi you speak of is at foundation establishment stage, then she couldn't possibly be the refining pharmacist. This is because it would be impossible for her to refine such a pure pill with such outcomes using her spiritual fire. That person has to have reached a rank equal to mine, at least in refining, and at the very least, their cultivation has to be at gold core stage." Chapter 468. Not reciprocating would be rude, however. The muffled voice paused for a second before continuing on. "There isn't that much coincidence in the world. That genius Dr. Shi you speak of has too perfect timing. Even if he isn't the refining pharmacist, he certainly has a connection with the refining pharmacist. Go secretly dig for information, but before you find out what's happening on the opponent's side, don't act blindly." At once, Feng Tianba and Feng Yunjing stood up from their sitting positions and bowed toward the voice. "Yes, honored sir." Then, The two people slowly walked away from this foggy mountain and river area. On the way back, Feng Tianba said, Yunjing, this time when you go to Jinling country, you must discover genius Dr. Shi's identity. The best scenario would be to bring him back to Feng family. I understand, father. Feng Yunjing coldly agreed to the order and bowed his head, but a flash of cutting edge went through his eyes went undetected when he did so. Shiyu, wait for me. Soon, I'll make you into one of my people. In the dead of the night, two figures silently landed on the windowsill of Shengda Hall's second floor. Gu Lufeng, who had originally been sleeping soundly on the second floor, seemed to have experienced some sort of reaction. Suddenly awakening, he spoke into the darkness with a deep, quiet voice. Who is it? Under the moon's weak light, a beautiful and delicate youthful face appeared, and behind her there was a detached and bitingly cold male that was faintly perceptible. Surprised, Gu Lufeng said, Little Yuer, how come it's you? Hushi lightly jumped off the windowsill and landed in front of Gu Lufeng. By now, Gu Lufeng snapped out of his initial shock, and a smile that wasn't a smile could faintly be seen on his face as he teased. Little Yuer, it's the dead of the night and you're rushing into my room. Are you planning to sneak attack me? Really, if little Yuer wants my hug, it's available to you at any time. Once Gu Lufeng said these words, Hushi still hadn't responded, but behind her, the man's face had turned completely frozen. An imposing manner erupted from his body shortly after, and an immense pressure began to build up in the room. Even the temperature dropped several degrees. His eyes were like pairs of ice as he ruthlessly stared Gu Lufeng down. Young Master Gu, please act accordingly. How can our Wang Fei be someone you can tease as you please? If you continue to speak so rudely, don't blame me for being impolite. Before Gu Lufeng could respond, Hushi ruthlessly gave a cold glance at both of them and coldly said, Shut up. Get down to business. Wu Xian and Gu Lufeng both looked at each other. The latter rubbed his nose and mischievously laughed. Little Yuer, your guard really can't take a joke. He's just like his family's master. Out of the corner of her eye, Hushi saw that Wu Xian was about to erupt from anger and promptly began to diffuse the situation. Don't be noisy. This is Wu Xian. His cultivation is at nascent soul stage. In order to protect us during our operation tonight, he'll be following behind us. Flabbergasted, Gu Lufeng asked, What operation? In Hushi's eyes, a hint of icy edge appeared in her eyes as she serenely answered, Isn't there still have information in Murong Manor that can be used against you? It just so happens that it's overdue for me to give Murong Linfeng, that mother and son pair, their easing tendons pill. Adding on to this was their visit, or provocation, today. It'd be rude of us not to reciprocate. It would be good for us to return the compliment tonight. Gu Liufeng's eyes suddenly brightened, and his mood surged up and down. When he spoke, his voice was slightly shaking. Little Yuer, you. Although Hushi's words were cold, Gu Lufeng knew that if it weren't for the information that could be used against him and his own hatred, Hushi would not take the risk to go back to Murong Manor, nor would she bring along one of Ming Wang Manor's nascent soul stage guards. The purple vine in Hushi's hands flew out and wrapped itself around Gu Liufeng's body. Sneering, since Murong family dares to court risks, tonight will nicely help them succeed. Chapter 469. Murong Feng's study. Just after saying this, her entire person jumped out of the window and began floating high up in the sky. Then, using Qinggong, she flew across the roof and into the darkness with Gu Lufeng following behind. Wu Xian's person silently disappeared into the night without a trace. It was just as if he was never there. Before half an incense stick finished burning, both Hushi and Gu Lufeng had arrived at Murong Manor. Just like before, there were many guards in Murong Manor. However, unlike last time when she had come to save Gu Lufeng, all the guards seemed more relaxed. Using his divine knowledge, Gu Lufeng quietly and carefully swept his eyes over the entire manor. After he confirmed that there were no martial artists stronger than himself, he let out a breath that he didn't realize he had been holding. This proved that ash-cloaked man Hushi encountered the previous time wasn't in Murong Manor at the current moment. The two people relaxed, made themselves comfortable on the roof. Gu Lufeng leaned closer to Hushi and whispered in her ear, I don't know where they store the information that could be used against me. However, from my memories, I remember that Morong family has a forbidden area in the manor. In my childhood, I recall that Morong Linfeng accidentally went in there once, and even he had been firmly chided afterward. Where is it? Gu Liufeng's eyes darkened at the question. It's Morong Feng's study. Morong Feng was Gu Liufeng's father. At the very least, he was his father by blood. It was just that this so-called father was a brute that tortured both him and his mother. Gu Lufeng paused and deeply sucked in a breath before continuing. Each month, Morong Feng goes into the study for a long time. Once there was even a time where he brought my mother into the study. But after my mother came back, she became even crazier and every inch of her skin was damaged. How could an ordinary person stay in the study for such a long time? Hushi knit her brow and continued, only if it wasn't a study in the first place. Wouldn't it be better if we went there first to explore around the area? The two people's figures flashed and noiselessly began heading in the direction of Morong Feng's study. The area surrounding the study had much more guards compared to the rest of the manor. There was also a faint gloomy feeling hovering in the sky that didn't go away for a long time. Hushi's brow raised, and she took the little gold dragon out of her space. When the little golden dragon heard Hushi's summons, it felt extremely happy. In this shumi mustard subspace, there was Dandan who had the miraculous ability to refine pills. Then, there was Little Purple who was a little expert in fighting. All that was left was itself, a freeloader with nothing to offer. He was the Grand Golden Dragon. How could he be beat by a purple vine and a little pig? Lauda, don't hesitate to tell me instructions. Do you want me to completely wipe out these guards? You can rest assured. Just give me the time it takes a stick of incense to burn, and I'll perfectly complete the task. Hushi seemed to completely ignore its enthusiasm and merely indifferently said, I remember you saying that you can change figures after advancing past 5th rank? Change into... She paused and glanced at the little golden dragon's thin body and swaying claws before proceeding to instruct, change into a lizard and enter this study. Once inside, explore everything inside and report back. Once the little golden dragon heard her orders, it immediately opened its mouth to lowly shout, Loud, I'm a dragon. Not a snake. Not even just a dragon. I'm a golden dragon. How can you ask others to change into a lizard? This is asking me to lower my status too much. Oh, you aren't willing. I'll just forget about it. In the future when I make any foods, you can also... Don't. Once it heard Hushi mentioning her foods, the little golden dragon panicked. Immediately, it pointed its finger at the sky and vowed, loud to rest assured. Isn't it just turning into a lizard and exploring the area? If I'm unable to complete this, then I'm not fit to be your Xiaodi. Once it made its vow, it seemed as if it was scared that Hushi would change her mind and its figure flashed. Soon after, an ordinary black lizard appeared in its place. Chapter 470 Brutes. The little golden dragon now had the ability to transform itself into other animals. However, it was limited to small animals and animals that had similar body types to its own. If it were to transform into a large elephant, its spiritual power would be wiped out in just 3 seconds, and it would return back to its original form. The ordinary, black lizard ran over to the front of Morong Feng's study. Then, it slipped in through one of the cracks without anyone noticing. After a short amount of time passed, Hushi was contacted by the little golden dragon and received news. Lauda, it's absolutely empty in here. There are no people. But I do sense cold permeating below this room. Hushi and Gu Lufeng both turned to look at each other. A rock quietly flew out of Hushi's sleeves and went under a distant underbrush. Chi La sounded out in the quiet night, alarming the surrounding guards. The few people quietly shouted, Who is it? Each of the guards began to make their way over to the direction of the underbrush. At the same time, Hushi and Gu Lufeng seized the opportunity to slip into the study unnoticed. Simultaneously, the purple vine came out and created a barrier around the study. Little Yuer, quickly come and see. Gu Liufeng's voice suddenly echoed in Hushi's ears. Hashi turned around and saw that his hand was pressing down on a black, flying serpent sculpture. The soaring serpent sculpture was resting on a shelf that displayed various other antiques. If one merely glanced at the sculpture in passing, it would be considered completely ordinary. But if one carefully examined it, they would discover that this flying serpent sculpture actually wasn't made out of iron or jade. Its surface was exceedingly glossy, as if people frequently touched it. Gu Liufeng's face became heavier and he slowly remarked, "I once witnessed Murong Feng cleaning the dust off this soaring serpent." Once he said this, his hand suddenly violently turned the flying serpent's head around. Immediately after he did so, ka-ka sounds were heard. A moment later, the shelf moved on either side, opening up a dark passageway. The passage used limestone slates as steps. When these were stepped on, it caused a bone-chilling feeling to emerge in a person. Both of their faces were grave. Following the steps, they quickly walked further down. Soon, Hashi was able to hear several young children's voices crying and begging for forgiveness. "I'm begging you guys, spare me. Spare me. I don't want money and I don't want to eat. Please spare me. Woo woo woo. Elder brother. I feel very unwell. I can't breathe. Elder brother. You guys are brutes. Don't touch my younger sister. Younger sister. Younger sister. You guys are a group of brutes. You won't receive good deaths." The two looked at each other for a second before they stopped making all sounds. Then, they quickly hid themselves in the shadows and watched what was happening under the light. The scene caused Gu Lufeng to suck in a breath. His face became incomparably dark and angry. Even Hashi, who was used to such bloody and cruel scenes, deeply pursed her brows. From their position, they could see that the nearby basement had been divided into two separate sections. The left side was set up like a refining pills room. Several grisly, bearded old men were currently maintaining a spiritual fire whilst watching the circumstances in the pill cauldron. It was just that the right side of this basement was like a bloody slaughterhouse, creating a stark contrast with the left side. There were over 100 cages that were all densely packed on the floor. In each cage, there were 2 children locked inside. There were a mix of boys and girls in the cages. The oldest children Hashi could see were about 8 of 9 years old, while the youngest seemed to be 3 or 4 years old. They looked like animals that were just shoved and locked in a cage. Some of the children were crying, others were begging for forgiveness. A few were angrily shouting insults, and there were even a couple that were blankly staring off into space, completely at a loss at what to do. Beside all of the cages, there were 7 or 8 children suspended in the air. Each of their carotid arteries, major blood vessels in the neck, had been cut open, allowing for blood to freely flow out. The blood dripped down into a copper basin on the floor, taking only moments to completely fill to the brim. Chapter 471 Little Boy Warning: This chapter is somewhat graphic and contains upsetting content/topics. Read at your own risk. In the beginning, the pitiful kids were still able to scream and howl in pain. But as time went on, all their blood had flowed out and their faces were pale. They were no longer able to speak, and in the midst of all the pain, they lost their lives. But even at this state, those uncivilized brutes still didn't let them off. While their corpses were still warm, those uncivilized brutes cut off pieces of their flesh in practiced motions and threw them into another basin. If there was still a few drops of blood, they would carefully let it drip into the blood-filled basin before throwing the flesh into the second one. The entire process seemed extremely practiced. It almost felt as if they were machinery. It looked like an assembly line at a factory and felt like they had done this 100,000 times before. When all of the children had been taken care of, those uncivilized brutes let out a few devilish laughs. They then turned around to walk toward the cages full of children. The children all moved backward in their cages, pushing themselves against the back of the cage walls in an attempt to hide themselves. They let out mournful shrieks, trying to evade this miserable destiny. But when those brutes heard the children's screams, it seemed to add to their happiness. One of the brutes grabbed onto a 5 or 6-year-old little girl and held her up. Holding onto her legs, he held her completely upside down while examining her. As he did so, he burst into giddy laughter, Look at this little girl's tender flesh. When all her blood has dripped out and we've finished skinning her, let's roast her meat and eat it. It must be the world's finest delicacy. Mine isn't that bad either. Another one of the men grabbed onto a 4-year-old boy's collar. In one motion, he took the boy's clothes off. Swallowing his saliva, he commented, "Look how tender his flesh is. If we use it to cook stew, this meat will certainly be tasty and soft. It'll be a delicacy." When the two children heard their words, they became even more terrified and began to loudly cry. They struggled to get out, but they looked like chicks in an eagle's talons. What possibility could they have of escaping? The two people who captured the children burst into loud laughter. They looked at the children's struggling appearances and seemed to get immense satisfaction from it. Suddenly, one of the men felt a sharp pain on their lower leg. Following this, the little boy he had been holding in the air was snatched away. The uncivilized brute angrily lowered his head to look at who had done it and quickly looked into a pair of fierce eyes that resembled those of wolf cubs. All he saw was a boy that was roughly 8 or 9 years old. He wore tattered clothes and his whole face was full of mud and dust. The sharp pain he had felt just then had come from this boy's teeth biting his leg. The boy then took advantage of the fact that he was distracted and quickly snatched the little boy out of his grip. "You son of a bye! Are you impatient of living? You actually dare to bite me?" Soon after, the uncivilized brute raised his palm and ruthlessly swung at the boy's face. All that was heard was a loud paw sound as the little boy was thrown back into the cage with a bleeding mouth. But, like before, he still glared at the uncivilized man without a hint of cowering in his eyes. He even hid 3 children behind him. Painted on his face was a look of fierceness, displaying that he wasn't afraid to die. Very good. The man was provoked by the look in his eyes and sneered at him. "Since you want to court death, I'll help you become a dried corpse." As he was speaking, he crouched down and ruthlessly dragged the boy out of the cage. The 3 children hidden behind the boy started to wail, crying out "Gidge." Using all of their strength, they held onto the boy's clothes in a desperate attempt to prevent him from being taken away. However, how could their strength compare to the uncivilized man? The little boy was very quickly picked up like a chick and dragged out of the cage. "Smelly boy, soon you'll know the result of offending me." "Ayo, smelly boy, you actually dared to scratch me." Soon after, 5 bloody marks appeared on the man's face, and he felt a painful ache coming from his face. The man's sorry state brought on all of his companions' laughter, filling the entire room with their chuckles. "Chen Laosi, the longer you live, the dumber you become. You can't even handle a little brat," he's saying me arrogantly. Chapter 472, Killing a Superior. Chen Laosi suddenly became even more enraged, irritated from his comrades' teasing. Raising the child even higher up in the air, he motioned to ruthlessly slam the child onto the ground. "AI, Chen Laosi, don't become befuddled. Master spent countless pills to obtain these children in order to turn them into culture fluid. The culture fluid must survive. If you allow the precious culture fluid to fall to its death, you'd have to be careful not to let the master skin you." Chen Laosi's face turned sinister and abruptly pressed the child down on a chopping block. He looked down at the child with an evil smile painted on his face. "Even if I can't kill him, I can chop his hands and feet off. Letting his blood flow a little bit won't cause harm, right? Eldest brother, don't kill eldest brother." Woo woo woo. The children from that cage let out heart-tearing cries when they heard what the man said. The boy that was held down on the chopping board also struggled under Chen Laosi's hold, but his strength was no match for Chen Laosi's. The little boy looked up and saw Chen Laosi raising the large knife higher and higher. Then, he watched as the knife began nearing himself more and more. Without another option, the little boy closed his eyes in desperation. But, after a few moments, he felt none of the pain he had originally anticipated. Instead, he heard a loud pong sound come from the side of his ear. It was the sound of the large knife falling to the floor. Following this, the entire basement became chaotic. The little boy cautiously opened his eyes to see and saw two figures slowly walking over from outside the dark and light boundary. The person walking in front had delicate, handsome features, but their face held an unsightly, bright red scar. In his hand he held a flying sword that was bursting with coldness. As for Chin Laosi, who was just about to chop his limbs off, he was already rolling around on the floor, clutching onto the bloody remnants of his arm and screaming out in agony. "Who are you guys? Do you know what place this is?" The basement had turned chaotic and disorderly. Even the several old men who were originally refining pills had come over to check out the huge commotion. Gu Lufeng sneered in response to the question. He looked at these brutes who looked human but were nothing more than beasts at heart. The longer he looked at them, the more the hatred and loathing became apparent in his eyes. "I've come to take your life." Right after he said this, he began waving his cold sword around. The sword moved too fast to be seen by the naked eye. Instead, the only thing that could be seen was a light trail following closely behind it. Due to the speed at which Gu Lufeng swung his sword, it looked as if there were fireworks in the air around him. Screams of pain followed the sword's light. Wherever it went was where the screams sounded out. Broken limbs, snapped arms, and blood spatters flew all over the room, turning it into a bloody hell. The entire time, Hushi stood to the side and leisurely watched on. There wasn't a trace of evidence that she was going to help. Unexpectedly, before she even moved her hand, a small person's shadow advanced toward an old man who was just about to press a mechanism and knocked him out of the way. The pill-refining old man fell to the floor and began screaming out in pain. At this time, the little boy hopped off the chopping block and took a machete along with him. He walked over to the man and began to ruthlessly chop on the old man. Blood splattered everywhere, and the warm, fishy-smelling substance sprayed onto the little boy's face. For a moment, he blanked out before returning back to his senses. There wasn't an iota of fear in his eyes. There was only a thick sense of hatred. The little boy felt eyes on the back of his head and turned around to see, only to meet Hushi's smiling yet not smiling eyes. The youth residing outside of the dark and light boundary had clean, white jade-like skin and bright red lips. But their eyes oozed iciness. It felt like crystal-clear spring water that was both remote and cold. Those bright red lips were slightly turned up. The expression they looked at him with was so aloof, so indifferent. Yet it was what enticed him into wanting to approach them more, to long to near them. Chapter 473. Filthy person. The little boy wiped the blood off his face and proceeded to stick his chest out. He set off the feeling of, "I'm not scared at all," whilst staring directly at Hushi. This tsundere act he put on caused Hushi to be unable to stop herself from laughing out loud. The little boy's face turned red, and he immediately turned around to run away. Still carrying the machete, he ran over to the front of the cages and began to directly hack at the locks on them. Once he opened them, he took each of the children out, one by one. By this time, Gu Lufeng had already single-handedly brought all of the people in the basement down. He stood atop the mountain of corpses in the sea of blood with his long sword directly pointed at one of the old men who refined pills and coldly questioned, "Tell me, what was the purpose of you kidnapping and bringing so many children here?" "Spare my life. Spare my life, Taoist immortal. We were only hired here to refine supplement spirit and cleaning spirit pills for these children. We don't know anything else. Begging Taoist immortal to spare my life. We're actually all Morong family's people. If you killed us, Morong family wouldn't let you off. If there are children of immortals in this group and Taoist immortal takes them away." Before the old man could complete his sentence, Gu Lufeng had already cut his head off. His head flew off and onto the floor. Just like this, the man breathed his last breath. He then walked over to Chin Laoba, whose hand had been cut off. Pressing the pointed edge of the blade against his neck, he slowly asked, "Tell me, what does Morong Feng want to do with all these children? And where did you steal all these children from?" Chin Laoba had already watched with his own eyes as Gu Lufeng killed and slaughtered all his companions. He had long already been scared witless, pooping and peeing on the floor as he watched. He cradled his own snapped-off arm and with a trembling voice he said, I don't know anything. We're only in charge of removing blood from these children's bodies. The people above require 3 basins full of blood every day. Moreover, the blood must be from virgin males and females who possess spiritual roots. As to what exactly the blood is for, we don't know. Gu Liufeng's eyes shifted over to the blood-filled copper basins. They were about the size of a well and knee-high. This much blood. How many virgin boys and girls were required to fill these up? Gu Lufeng coldly stated. You guys were able to bring so many children here? Especially children with spiritual roots. They're street urchins, one. Chen Laobao paused to bite his trembling teeth before continuing to elaborate. For the most part, they're street urchins, though there are some that were stolen away from villages. As long as the child possesses the slightest bit of spiritual root, we'll try our best to get our hands on them. Gu Lufeng deeply sucked in a breath at the news. Then he suddenly lowly began to laugh. Little Yuer, do you see it now? This is Morong family, one of Yinjing City's 4 biggest families. He, surprisingly my body possesses such filthy blood. Hushi slowly walked over to Gu Lufeng. At the same time, the purple vine flew out from her wrist and pierced into Chen Laobao's body. Chen Laobao was overwhelmed with shock. After, his eyes widened as he felt the blood in his body slowly being absorbed by that purple vine. Spare my life. His words were hoarse and broken, but as more and more of his blood was sucked out of his body, he lacked even the power to speak words. Chen Laobao remembered that he had once cut some of the children's throats like so. He watched as they struggled, howled in pain, and still watched as their blood slowly flowed out, eventually bringing an end to their young lives. At the time he was so excited, so proud of himself, but now times had changed and karma had come so quickly. Once the purple abyss vine finished sucking the body dry, successfully turning it into a dried-out corpse, it shook its leaves and disdainfully cast the body aside. It then flew over to Hushi, happily returning into her hands. Hushi moved to pet the vine's shaking leaves before turning to address Gu Lufeng, slowly saying, On the world there isn't filthy blood, only filthy people. Nobody can determine their birth, but at the very least, we can determine what path we walk on. 1. Street urchin. A child who spends most, if not all, of their time on the streets, usually located in slum areas. We only wish to follow Elder Brother, begging Elder Brother to bring us along. Hushi's eyebrows jumped and her eyes showed traces of astonishment. The children at the very back were joyously crying because they were going to return back to their mothers and fathers. But the boy at the very front, as well as a few of the children standing directly behind him, had completely clear eyes. There wasn't a bit of envy or timidness in their eyes. Hushi used her divine knowledge to sweep over these few children's bodies and discovered that their aptitudes weren't bad. The worst child had 3 spiritual roots. The best one was that little boy. He actually had dual attributes of wind and fire. Not only that, his spiritual root's essence purity was quite high. Hushi hugged her chest. Right now you guys are useless. If I took you in, I would have to feed and clothe you. Wouldn't this be a losing business deal? At once, the little boy refuted her words. After we've become strong, we can give our lives to you. It doesn't matter what you want us to do. We'll do anything. Hushi sneered at him. How do I know whether or not you're able to become strong? If I was to raise you until you're older and you turn out to be a group of thankless wretches, wouldn't I be eating a big loss then? We aren't thankless wretches. We are good children. We'll listen to you. The children behind the little boy weakly retorted Hushi's questions. The little boy clenched his teeth and raised his head to say, Or, you can turn me into a slave. I know all martial artists can have slaves. This way you don't have to be worried about whether or not I'll run away, right? The corner of Hushi's eyes slightly jumped. Do you know what it means to be turned into a slave? Spirit soul slaves must draw out a part of their soul. This means that if you want to cultivate in the future, you won't be able to amount to much. The little boy's face twisted with pain when Hushi said that, but when he turned back around to look at the naive faces of the children behind him, he still clenched his teeth and told Hushi, "I'm willing to be your slave, but you have to agree to let all of us follow you. Moreover, you can't turn them into slaves." They both stared at each other, neither backing down. There was obvious fear in the little boy's eyes and his body was shaking, but despite this, he didn't hesitate. At last, a satisfied expression appeared on Hushi's face. She took out a porcelain bottle and threw one at him, faintly saying, "If you became a spirit soul slave, your strength would greatly decline. Why would I raise a useless piece of rubbish to play with it? Since you guys are so confident that you won't betray me, each of you has to swallow one of these pills. This is a medicine that I refine myself. Its purpose is to control people's hearts. As long as you don't change your mind and decide to betray me, the poison won't flare up. But if there's any disloyalty on your part, this pill will let you taste the feeling of being unable to beg for your life nor for your death. How about it? Are you guys still willing to swallow it?" The little boy held onto the porcelain bottle and hesitatingly said, "We all have to eat it?" "Of course." Hushi faintly laughed. "Granted. Even if you're able to guarantee that these children won't betray me today, what about in 10 or 100 years? I stick by my words. I refuse to raise a bunch of thankless wretches." "Okay, we'll swallow it." The little boy clenched his teeth and opened the porcelain bottle. He poured one pill out and then swallowed the entire thing in one go. For the most part, the children behind him were all still ignorant to what was going on. When they saw the little boy swallowing the pill, they each obediently grabbed one pill from the boy and swallowed it, yet they didn't know what the pill was for. Satisfied, Hushi nodded her head. "Very good. Since this is the case, stay here first and wait with those other little fellows. Once we're done dealing with our matters, we'll come get you all." When the little boy heard of Hushi's plan, his face immediately showed doubt and he nervously asked, "We all swallowed your medicine. You won't go back on your word, right?" Since a young age, he had roamed around alone. He'd long grown accustomed to adults' mean features. Even if the elder brother in front of him caused him to unconsciously want to draw closer, he still held some suspicions in his heart. Hushi sneered, "If I were to abandon you guys, would you be able to keep up with me? Would it be necessary for me to waste a bottle of pills?" After she finished speaking, she didn't wait for the little boy to reply before grabbing onto Gulufeng. Their bodies both flashed and then disappeared. Dazed, the little boy stood still and stared at the spot Hushi and Gulufeng were just at. Then, he snapped out of it and wiped at his still bloody-smelling face. Grinding his teeth, he muttered, We'll just wait here. Elder brother will definitely quickly come and bring us out." These words were comforting to all the children in the basement, including himself. In the dark prison, Morong Feng's hands gripped onto a lash that had been dipped in salt water and firmly wiped a woman on the floor. The woman's hair was in disarray, her whole face was blood-stained, and her body was full of bruises. As she was being whipped, she couldn't make any sounds aside from howling and crying. Morong Feng retrieved his whip and ruthlessly kicked the woman. Then, he walked over to the nearby torture shelf. The slender figure bound on the shelf had half a mask hanging off his face and his body was also entirely bruised. Chapter 476 Torture. His eyes were filled with pleading and dread and his mouth was wide open. But even after it was wide open for a while, no sounds came out. Morong Feng looked at the man that had been bound by black iron chains and sneered, "How is it, Morong Lufeng? Do you still not wish to surrender? Do you want to continue watching your mother being whipped?" The man bound up desperately wanted to speak, but even though his mouth was wide open, he couldn't say a word. He was so frustrated that even tears began to roll down his face. But apart from twisting his face, he couldn't make any other sounds. Forget it. Morong Feng serenely said, "I originally wanted to ask about that genius Dr. Shi's identity. But since you can't see good from bad, I'll just act as if I never had you, this son." As Morong Feng was speaking, his face exposed a sinister and demonic expression. In one fell swoop, He ripped the man's half-on mask off. Soon, a beautiful face appeared in front of him, but his face was riddled with bright red scars. Now that our Morong family has the cold food pill prescription, that genius doctor, she isn't significant anymore. But you're just like that coquettish and sly mother of yours. Since birth till now, you've seduced countless people, correct? Since it's like this, I'll just send you to the Black Law Protector, Mr. Liao. He loves to play with handsome men the most. If he's happy with you, he'll feel more inclined to give us pill prescriptions that are better than cold food. You unfilial son can be considered to have made some contribution to Morong family. He. As Morong Fong was speaking, the man tied to the torture rack opened his eyes wide and his whole body was shaking. Once Morong Fong finished his sentence, he immediately began to struggle. His mouth was wide open, as if he wanted to yell out. However, apart from the clanking of the black iron chains, his throat seemed as if it had been pinched closed. Apart from ear-piercing ah sounds, he couldn't produce any other sounds. His tears and mucus filled his face, causing him to lack his ordinary quiet and proud aura. Instead, he seemed like a petty and low coward. It was truly pitiful. When Morong Fong saw him looking like this, he thought that he had finally scared him senseless with his torture, and he became filled with pride. Taking a pill out, he stuffed it in Morong Liufeng's open mouth. Swallow this changing result pill. You won't be able to revolve your spiritual force in 7 days. Even if you're at the summit of Gold Core stage, it's useless. All you can do is lie down on Mr. Liao's body and tactfully cater to him. After 7 days, I'm afraid that Mr. Liao would have already used double cultivation method and dried you out completely. He, Gu Yulan and Morong Lufeng. This is the result of you two sluts rebelling. Immediately after uttering his question, he suddenly realized. The Morong Lufeng in the prison just then was a fake. He didn't doubt or guess this. He was certain that this was true. When he saw the coldness that enveloped Gu Liufeng's person, he realized that the real Gu Lufeng wouldn't show frightened or pleading expressions, even if his whole body was filled with bruises. And he definitely wouldn't be scared, crying, and begging for forgiveness. You would be able to identify the true Gu Lufeng by just looking at his eyes. They were clear, fervent, and decisive. Naturally, his eyes were very different from Morong family's, so much so that Morong Fong even loathed them. After thinking to thus far, Morong Fong suddenly became full of alarm. His eyes were wide with panic, and with a trembling voice, he asked, if you're here, then who is the Morong Lufeng in the prison? Gu Lufeng arrogantly looked at Morong Fong and coldly laughed at him. Morong Fong, you hid day after day in here, refining pills. Don't tell me that you didn't feel that you haven't seen your beloved son and wife for so many days? Morong Feng's temple palpitated, and he recalled that Madame Morong's servant girl had told him several days before that both Madame Morong and Morong Linfeng were missing without a trace. At the time, his hands were full with refining pills and didn't have time to pay attention to some missing person. All he thought was that the two of them had gone somewhere to relieve their boredom. Could it be that wasn't it? If it wasn't, where could they have gone? Gu Lufeng lowly began to laugh. His laugh was laced with evil intentions. What? You still haven't figured it out? Or could it be that you still don't want to believe things when they're right in front of you? To tie a man up with black iron chains, to scald and whip him day and night, and to lock a woman in a tiny suitcase and arbitrarily bully and humiliate her in that dusky dungeon. Morong Fong, you're very clear on those feelings, right? But unknowingly, that person you scalded and whipped was your beloved son. The woman that you locked in a tiny suitcase and tortured until she turned into an idiot is your first wife. Who knows what you must be feeling now? Ha ha ha, no. This isn't possible. This can't be possible. Morong Fong suddenly let out a hysterical shout and threw himself at Gu Lufeng. You vile son! It was you? This vile son. That caused me to bring harm to Linfeng. You made me bring harm to Linfeng's life. Just thinking about the fact that he had just sent his own beloved son to that perverted Mr. Liao to play with, caused Morong Fong to feel as if his whole world had been shaken. His heart felt as if it had just been torn to shreds. Gu Liufeng's eyes burst with burning flames. But when he spoke, his words were actually icy cold. Oh. So your son was actually tortured to death by you? Big congratulations to you. You thought that the person you were torturing was Morong Lufeng, so you didn't care about his life or death. You could stare on blankly as he fell into the pits of hell, suffered torture, and died? Morong Feng, you're truly a good father. Morong Feng hysterically said, you're a lowly type of person. You were born from a slut. I've never regarded you as my son. I only looked at you as another chess piece in my hands. If I want you alive, you'll live. If I want your death, you'll die. Just as he finished saying these words, he clapped his hands. Suddenly, a figure rushed out from a secret door located behind the pill stove and flashed over to Gu Lufeng. On the spot, Gu Lufeng rolled out of the way and was just about to retaliate. But when he saw the person in front of him, he involuntarily let out a cry of surprise. Jiu Jiu-1? The person that holding onto a knife and in the process of attacking him had lifeless eyes and a face full of unhealed scars. If it wasn't his Jiu Gui Dao, then who was it? Ewan, Jiu Jiu, maternal uncle. However, Gui Dao seemed to have completely lose consciousness and looked as if he didn't even hear Gu Liufeng's voice. With the knife in his hand lifted and all the spiritual power he had in him channeled into it, he faced Gu Lufeng and ruthlessly hacked in his direction. In the moment of life and death, Hushi's figure appeared, like a demon, beside Gu Liufeng's body. In one swift motion, she dragged him behind her body. At the same time, the purple vine came out and blocked Gu Yidao's blow. Hushi looked back to see Gu Liufeng's dazed expression and couldn't help but coldly remind him, "What are you still dazed about, Gu Lufeng? Gu Yidao is already being controlled by him. Do you want Morong Feng to have his way?" When Gu Lufeng had been scolded by Hushi, he suddenly returned to his senses. Sure enough, he saw that Gu Yidao's movements were sluggish and his eyes were vacant. Not only this, he also saw that he was clearly at gold core stage, yet he wasn't able to display that strength. It was clear that he had been controlled. Moreover, it wasn't just an ordinary control over a slave. Gu Lufeng tightened his fists. He didn't expect that the juju he had intentionally sent to the outskirts to recuperate would ultimately end up in Morong Feng's hands. No wonder he hadn't received any replies from Gu Yidao after sending multiple letters after he had rescued his mother. When Morong Feng saw Gu Lufeng seething with anger, he couldn't help but laugh and sneer at him. "Do you wish to know how I captured this man? When he heard that you were imprisoned by me, he foolishly ran over here to rescue you, all by himself. In the end, he just happened to have gotten into the Black Law Protector's hands. Ha ha ha. Death was near from him. Yet this man was still yelling out your names, Gu Lufeng and his mother's. That type of manner is truly nauseating. But that's all in the past. Nowadays he's my puppet. If I order him to kill people, he'll kill people. If I tell him to go die, he'll go die." When he finished speaking, the spiritual power in his body flowed out, and he coldly ordered Gu Yidao, "Go and kill those two for me. Don't be stingy with your life. Fight as if your life depends on it." When Gu Yidao heard Morong Feng's words, he looked like a puppet that had just been switched on. The knife in his hand raised, and he ruthlessly chopped down at Gu Lufeng. Gu Lufeng raised his long sword several times to retaliate. But when he saw his Juju's face, he couldn't help but lower his sword again and blindly evade his attacks. All the while he was shouting out, "Juju, Lufeng ah! Quickly wake up! Ha ha, wake up! Don't dream!" Morong Feng loudly laughed. Who let him have such bad luck and made him bump into the Black Law Protector? Nowadays he's long since already lost his soul and become a mindless battle puppet. It's better if you wait until your next lifetime for him to wake up. Ha ha ha! Gu Lufeng looked at Morong Feng with scarlet red eyes and pounced on him. "Morong Feng, you brute! I'm going to kill you." However, a knife quickly cut horizontally in front of him, blocking his road. Gu Yidao was fighting like his life was on the line. Unless Gu Lufeng moved to kill him, he would be unable to forcefully make him withdraw. Gu Liufeng's heart was filled with discontentment and hatred, but he couldn't vent his feelings. It caused him to want to dismember Morong Feng into 1,000 pieces. Suddenly, he heard Hushi's clear and cold voice sound out from beside him. "I'm stalling Gu Yidao. You go capture Morong Feng. Regardless of what disease it is, capture the person and clearly look into it before making any other decision. If you act so impulsive and don't form a plan, aren't you just falling right into Morong Feng's calculations?" Gu Lufeng heaved a sigh, and the anger and franticness in his heart slowly washed away, and he became serene. That's right, he had Shiyu by his side. As long as Shiyu's here, Jujio had a chance to be saved. Even if Jujio's soul was lost and he was unable to recover, he will certainly make Morong Feng, that brute, pay the price. When he thought of this, an ominous glint sparked in Gu Liufeng's eyes. Seconds later, he disappeared from where he originally stood, like a phantom. At first, Morong Feng was looking incredibly carefree as he stood there. Then, all of a sudden, he saw Gu Lufeng disappear, and then saw his figure flash moments later. To his surprise, Gu Lufeng appeared not even 5 meters away from him. Morong Feng paled from fright and took out his magic weapon, completely flustered. He was the most skilled at refining pills in Morong family. Even his cultivation level was only as a result of pills. He was gold core stage, but in reality, he wouldn't even be able to stand his ground under the attacks of someone at the initial stage of gold core stage. And what about Gu Lufeng? His cultivation level was a result of a secret technique with the cost of burning away his life in order to forcibly rise in level. However, he had gone through a period of time that was filled with countless battles and self-discipline. He was also at the summit of gold core stage. How could Morong Feng, this coward, be his match? Therefore, even a mere encounter with Gu Lufeng had Morong Feng wanting to shout for Gu Yidao to come protect him. But before he could order Gu Yidao to do so, he felt a pain emerge from his thigh. Immediately after, his entire person was ruthlessly thrown to the floor. Natural silks, 1. Shot out from Gu Liufeng's hands, and in the blink of an eye, Morong Feng was sturdily tied up with silks. On the other hand, Gu Yidao and Hushi were engaged in an intense knife fight. But, in the end, a puppet was a puppet. Therefore, all his movements were mechanical and easily predictable. Even if he was at gold core stage, he was nothing more than a paper tiger. Hushi only had to dodge a few times before she quickly found the hole in Gu Yidao's fighting. After Gu Yidao swung his knife at her once more, her purple vine suddenly came out and tightly bound Gu Yidao's hands together. Gu Yidao began to violently struggle once he was bound by the purple abyss vine. Hushi took the opportunity to run forward with a silver needle in hand, accurately sticking it into the back of his head. Not even a moment later, the originally struggling Gu Yidao slowly calmed down and eventually fell into a deep sleep. Gu Lufeng immediately threw Morong Feng, who had been tied up by the natural silks, to the side and hurried over to Gu Yidao's side. He anxiously asked Hushi, "Shiyu, is my juju still savable?" Hushi regained her examining brain domain spiritual power and knit her brow. "We have to wait until we get back in order to be able to clearly grasp the current situation. But upon my initial examination, I found that his brain domain seemed to have been dug around by someone and thrown into chaos. But if his mind has truly been taken by someone, I'm afraid that even if I can keep him alive, it'll be very hard for him to return to his original state." When Gu Lufeng heard Hushi's verdict, his whole face became lifeless and he started to shake. Then, he suddenly stood up and rushed over to Morong Feng. He firmly grabbed him by the collar and sternly asked, "Morong Feng, what exactly did you do to my Jujio?" After being shaken, Morong Feng's vision blurred. Furthermore, the pain coming from the wound on his thigh caused him to grimace in pain. Gu Lufeng firmly punched him in the face and shouted out a warning, "Morong Feng, if you don't speak, trust me, I'll kill you right now." Hi. Morong Feng fell into a fit of heavy coughing. He looked at Gu Lufeng with eyes brimming with hatred and resentment. "You bast, Don't tell me you wish to commit patricide? Patricide? Gu Lufeng acted as if he had heard the world's biggest joke. Blood rushed to his eyes and his face was full of taunting. Morongfeng, do you think you're worthy of being my father? Does a father watch as his own son is being abused and stand by like a bystander? Does a father watch as his own child is being assaulted and indifferently watch on? And what father would ignore his own child's face in front of his mother, even going as far as to blackmail him? And what father would whip his own child and press a flat iron on his own child countless times, all in the name of forcing secrets out of his child? At 1. Natural silks. Silk that comes from silkworms, aka silk created through natural processes. If you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel, we're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.